we're going to encounter our weakness and our pride, right? And that's what I think training should be about, right? When you train in these forms, like, yeah, if you're going to do certain things, I need to encounter my weakness and my pride.
Welcome to the Rich Dawn, where eternal beatitude begins in this life. I'm Kyle Dean, and today I have back with me Dan Lawson, a licensed therapist, life coach, and a little-known fun fact about Brother Dan here is he is a martial arts instructor. Dan, how are you today?
Good to see you, man. Yeah, thanks for bringing me in.
Yeah, no doubt. Thanks for coming back on. So today we're gonna kind of crack into that a little bit. You've done some instructing in different martial arts over the years, and currently you're developing a Systema practice, which is a Russian martial arts. Is that masculine or a feminine martial art?
Oh, well, like Systema, so in Russia they would say, they call it Sipsavia. Sipsavia means to know yourself. But the word Systema means the system. And so essentially it is a way of thinking and a way of removing fear from the body and creating unity between the body and the mind and the spirit. And so all three of those components are addressed in Systema. And so I found it to be like the most complete system. There's a martial component, so there's a fighting component, but there's a healing component, and obviously there's a high level of a psychological component whereby you're removing fear from your body and from your system in general. So, but in Russia, like, it is the primary way of training Spetsnaz, the Special Operations Unit, right? And so for, I don't know, the history is like 900 years old, which is wild. And it's highly engaged with rooted in like Russian Orthodox Christianity, right?
That's fascinating. 900 years is like right when Orthodoxy began.
Yeah.
1054 AD.
Yeah. So like a lot of the practices, right? A lot of the breath practices from the early church, a lot of those things that you saw with maybe even the Crusaders, right? The people who fought in these in the Crusades, they kept those practices in Russia. And then obviously when the communists came to power, everything was oppressed, but they saw that this skill set that the Russian they reserved it for the Russian Special Operations Unit. They kept it because it had such a high level of religious component, but they were willing to keep it. And so you find that many of the instructors, not all of them, but many of the instructors from Russia at the time were very deeply religious men, and still are very deeply religious men, and they endured obviously the communist regime, but they were seen to be like the most dangerous people, right? So they let them just do what they had to do. So yeah,
fascinating.
It's wild, yeah.
So just to give the viewers and listeners some context on where we both come from here. For myself, I was trained up for a fairly brief amount of time in Aikido. I've also had some training with the jiu-jitsu, never long enough to, develop and advance in getting different belts or whatever else, but enough as a philosopher, theologian to truly appreciate and respect the mindset that goes into this. And the reason I led with that masculine, feminine question is because, a lot of martial arts are divvied up, either masculine, meaning like use force, break a person's body, right? Like Krav Maga, the IDF in Israel, the Israeli Defense Forces are trained up in Krav Maga, like literally just eliminate the threat. And then you have these feminine martial arts like Aikido, where I was trained up in, and don't get it confused. It's not feminine like...
Yeah, Steven Seagal's going to come after you. He'll come after you.
Yeah, feminine and effeminate are two very, very different concepts. But feminine is more... It's really about like, giving versus receiving, like this receptivity of redirecting energy. And I, for one, tend to love that because you can really heal, as you had mentioned. There can be a healing component to martial arts, which might be foreign to some viewer sensibilities. So maybe we can tap into that a little bit further. I don't know if Systema is clearly delineated one way or the other in that.
Oh, Systema is unique in the sense that it is really not. It really has to do with producing freedom so that you can do what is appropriate. But there's really only one rule in Systema, which is we do not destroy the body, our own body, or the person that we're confronting. And it's a unique thing because people think martial arts, that's ridiculous. You want to be good at violence, you want to destroy. But the issue, if you guys have ever watched, like if you ever seen UFC, or like we were watching Mike Tyson fight, well, that was pathetic. But you watch boxing, or you watch UFC, specifically UFC, the MMA guys, and they do hit each other and they do beat each other up, and those fights don't end unless someone's knocked out. And so what happens is when you strike people in every form of martial art that I've ever seen, boxing, jiu-jitsu, it escalates the fight. It escalates the conflict. And in this approach to martial combat, or this approach to like the combatives, it's de-escalating. When you hit, there's no anger. When you hit, there's really your body, your psyche has to be calm. And so you're always moving a person to de-escalation. Now that is a superior system in the sense that if this is actual open conflict and you're upset, right, you're the opposing force, and I'm relaxed and calm, well, then I'm always in control.
You've got the upper hand.
And then, yeah, I've got the upper hand. And if I have to move to a place where the mission requires the person to be removed, right, or C.S. Lewis would say to be unbodied, right, then, well, then that happens. But it happens from a place of being in control. But the goal is not to destroy, right? The goal is not to destroy the person. We want to build up the body. It's fascinating. If you saw Mike Tyson's fight, if you look at Mike Tyson, who's an older man, he's been fighting, and he's a fantastic athlete. In my opinion, he's in probably fantastic shape for a man who's almost 60 years old.
Oh,
but he's
fantastic. Yeah.
But he's crumpled up. And what happens over time is as you kind of constantly are tense and beating things, and anybody that listens to the show knows, because I've done boxing and different things over the years, is every form of martial combat really produces a lot of tension, and it starts to over time destroy your body. And so at the end, you are not feeling so great. Your knees hurt, you got neck problems, you got micro concussions, right, just from hitting, right? Because if you don't hit correctly, those vibrations go into your skull.
Oh, I can echo that. I've served a number of law enforcement agencies over the years, and they're big on jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of law enforcement officers train in jiu-jitsu. I've trained with a police officer who ran a jiu-jitsu club, and I've heard sometimes they run into those health issues over time as they get older.
Oh yeah. It's hard, right? So when I came into it, one of the big things was that the individual who instructed me asked, well, how long do you want to be a warrior? Do you want to be a warrior for a season, or do you want to be a warrior for the rest of your life? And in Systema, you're training to be a warrior for life. So when you're 65, you move like a cat, and you're still dangerous, and your health is good. And I don't see that, right? I don't see that really in any other martial arts system. Obviously, we live in America, and in America, martial arts is a business primarily, right? In the sense that there is a belt system. The Asiatic system, like the Chinese martial arts, or I did Wing Chun for a while, right? Which is essentially they'll say Kung Fu. Kung Fu basically means power, right? That's what it just means. It's a certain type of power, right? But you think about Wing Chun, which is a Chinese martial art, there's not really a belt system in a lot of these things. Belts came into practice in the United States really with the investment of business model, right? If you want to keep your belt, you're a black belt, you have to show up to class however many times a month. If you don't, you lose your standard or your standing in my dojo or in my school. And so does that make you any more or less dangerous? I have no idea. So what I found attractive about Systema was the quality of people. They were all older people. They were older than me. They were dangerous, the most dangerous people, some of them that I've seen. And they were humble. And they had become more humble and more approachable. And so I found that there was also an integration of their spiritual life, right? They weren't there to show off. They weren't there to look like the best person in the world, right? And but they were trying to again. What I remember there was, and I think we're gonna run a retreat in a couple weeks. And the thing that always stuck with me in the beginning of training, years ago, was we're going to encounter our weakness and our pride, right? And that's what I think training should be about, right? When you train in these forms, like, yeah, if you're going to do certain things, I need to encounter my weakness and my pride. There are people that are going to be stronger, or there are weaknesses in my body, or there are things that I don't know, or there's arrogance that I have. I better encounter it and remove it. So if I'm training, that better be removed. And as it gets removed, I become more free. So outside of that training environment, I should be more loving to people. I should be more able to forgive. I should be able to see opportunities. I should be less afraid of conversations, of opportunities. And I should not be so proud, right? And so, again, I found that to be attractive because it was consistent with my spirituality. And again, I didn't know that it even existed because, again, this thing's 900 years old, but it never really spread outside of Russia until the fall of the wall in the 90s, right? So if you're listening to this, you're like, well, what the heck is he talking about? Well, that's why. I mean, like this was like a Russian secret, right? They were not going to teach anybody this. It's a cultural thing, and there's a high level of again, like sacredness in terms of teaching people your secrets. People don't like to do that. The Chinese, see this with certain forms of kung fu. Like they don't want to teach outsiders these things because it's an advantage, right?
So what year did you get involved in martial arts writ large, or like how old were you? And then how long ago did you discover Systema?
So that's a unique set of stuff. So when I was a kid, my dad was like a really intense dude. My dad was like, I had a love-fear relationship with my dad. He was, he was an intense guy. I watched, when I think about as a kid, my dad was like a tough man. Like at one point he like had fought like 6 guys at the same time. He was like removed his own teeth. I watched him remove his own teeth. I watched him cauterize his leg.
Wait a minute. Was your dad Hitman?
No, he was not Hitman. If you met my dad at the end of his life, people were like, this guy, he was a character. He was a character. But my father, like, especially as a young kid, he scared me, and he was a hard man. And so, like, really, my response to my father to really deal with some of this was I wanted to not be weak. And so when I was like 11 or 12, I remember there was a YMCA, and I would ride my bike down the street to the YMCA, and I started taking like karate at the YMCA, and I didn't know, I just knew from the Karate Kid from like the 80s. I'm like, oh, this is going to help me.
I need to find my Mr. Miyagi.
Yeah, well, it was this guy, a nice gentleman, a security guard, named Sensei Spencer, and he was doing the Lord's work with these kids. Anybody who teaches kids martial arts is doing the Lord's work because it is hard. It's hard to remember what it's like to not know something. And so to have to take something you've refined for 20 years or something and teach a 10-year-old, that takes a lot of patience on yourself, and that takes a lot of thought. But he was very patient. He was a wonderful person, a lot of funny stuff. And so from that point, so that was Goju Karate, and so I got exposed to that, and over the course of my life. And then in high school, I got, because I was a smaller kid for the most part, like until I was probably junior year of high school, people would pick on me. So I learned how to get good at being violent and to start fights and fight people. And then that became like a thing for a time, right? And over the course, I've done Aikido, and I've done Muay Thai, kickboxing, which I thought was very, again, they like pain, right? So again, but I kept on, like, I would find that I would get discouraged because there are no perfect disciples. So the person that was instructing me, I would be like, okay, but they're missing the point. I never saw the humility. I wanted to see the humility. So I get frustrated. I'd be like, I don't care how tough you are. In my experience, tough guys die quick. And toughness makes you kind of stupid, right?
This reminds me, for anybody who's tuning in and is a regular on the Smuggling Hope podcast that Dan Lawson hosts, you did an episode not too long ago on why being an alpha male is overrated.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of peacocking. There's a lot of, what the world or what the secular culture instills in people. People like to mirror. People like to think, oh, if I've got a bunch of women surrounding me, or if I'm behaving in a certain way, that means that I'm successful. But in reality, when those people are faced with hard situations, they crumble. kind of like what you're describing right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's I like I think about it as like the spirituality of the crabs. Sometimes with people, they're very rigid on the outside about things, but inside they're all gooey, right? And like weird things shatter their life, or people are very strong or very intense or very powerful, but they can't integrate everything, right? You know, you think about like one of the toughest people out there, or at least is profound, like is probably David Goggins. And people look at David Goggins, and he is objectively a hard as nails kind of guy, right? And if you know who he is, you know who he is. Please don't come to my house, David. I don't want to jump in a pond. I don't need you to pistol whip me in the parking lot. But this guy was a Navy SEAL. He's a Navy SEAL. He's an Army Ranger, and I think he's pararescue. So nobody's ever done that. And he's from Western New York, and we'll all say a prayer for him. He's also a fallen away Catholic, right?
So we've got the Goo Goo Dolls and we got the Goggins.
We've got Goggins, yeah. But you gotta pray. You gotta pray for this man, because he's so dynamic in the sense this guy ran like over and over again in SEAL training with broken legs, and he's done all these 100-mile marathons and done all this remarkable stuff with physical feats of the body. But he's also then on like his 5th marriage, right? So relationships. He will even profess when he gives talks and stuff, he will say he really struggles with relationships. And so we have, like I said, can I encounter my pride and my weakness? So when I train, I need to have like a clarity as to what am I training for? And like, again, like, because again, I trained, a lot of the stuff I did was sports, or it was to try to prove that I was good enough, tough enough. A man. And again, like, I don't think until like I met other men with more and more humility, like, and that really loved me, like actually, and I mean loved me in the sense that it wasn't about them, it wasn't about cockiness, it was that they were dangerous, but they knew who they were. And I was like, well, who did they meet? And so my boxing instructor, you know, probably 9-10 years ago, we were talking, right, and he was, because I had gone back into boxing again, because boxing is a hell of a workout, and it's great. It's great for the mind. I think just like jiu-jitsu, all martial arts.
Isn't it supposed to be like 15 rounds?
Yeah, well,
there's 12. I don't know.
I'm gonna have to lose some weight for that one.
They keep dropping it. You know, if you're 60, you only get to do 8, right?
Well, I think he'd only have to do 8. But I mean, you got So it's a great workout, great people. Like again, and again, so the boxing is primarily like a sport, right? It's great, and so is jiu-jitsu. Like they have tactical applications, right? If you're a police officer, jiu-jitsu will definitely help you move a person on the ground and restrain a person. All these things are all martial arts work, right? Gary Lamb, who was the guy who was the instructor for everybody for the Matrix movies, for the Kung Fu, right? I don't know if Gary's still alive, but he's a fantastic martial artist out in California. And at one point he had given a talk where he was saying, like, you know, people ask me, what do you think about Wing Chun and other martial arts? Because that's his style, right? And people have their style. Well, he said all martial arts work. They all work. And it's true, they all work. And again, but it's just like therapy in a lot of ways too. Is like, does it meet with your identity? Does it meet with your worldview? And do you have confidence in using it, right? So probably around 9-10 years ago, like my boxing instructor was like, there was this guy, you really need to check this guy out in Toronto, who does this thing called Systema, and I had never heard of it before. And he said, you would like it because you're a religious guy, and so is he. And I'm like, what? And I had never heard that like,
you could marry the two.
Yeah, because I never thought that was possible. Because everybody's always like, yeah, I'm religious, but that stays out of the dojo, or that stays out of the gym, or I don't want to offend people. And how do you connect violence, or what I assume violence to be, with the message of Christianity? So I'm like, that's weird. But again, you know, the first time you get hit by a Systema practitioner, the first time I ever got hit by a person, it was odd, because for the first time I was hit in a way where there was no anger. I thought the only way you hit people was with tension and with anger. And it was weird to be hit and there was nothing there. There was no emotion. It was weird and disarming. And it really was helpful to remove fear that I had since I was a kid, being afraid of my father and my father's anger and my father's crazy behaviors, because I had all these fears about men. And so Systema for me removed, like, and again, it's kind of weird because I've been doing stuff that's been almost 25 years. for me to still like to be at that point when I thought that I knew something, and then to be again humbled because I've seen a lot of people, but I never saw people hit or do things like that.
So humbled and healed
Yeah,
from the first
from the
hit.
fist. Yeah, from the fist, and that's why I'm like, that's weird. And then I'm like,
Excellent.
and I'm like, and when I tell people that, they're like, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
But anybody who's been through that starts to see they lose their fears of being touched or hit or punched or any contact. Because over our life, so psychologically, as we advance, right? You got little kids, I have little kids. When we're little kids, we don't have a lot of fears because we haven't lived a lot. But as we get older, fears accumulate in the body. We're afraid of falling. We're afraid of rolling, right? We've got friends that really struggle with rolling sometimes.
Hey,
sometimes I forget. Yeah, sometimes I forget. Rolling is hard. If you're watching this podcast, see if you can roll. See if you can easily get to the floor because your fears get stuck in your body. And there's one of the things I'm going to be doing probably on my show. We're going to talk about trauma too, and how trauma is stored in the body. Which anybody who's a therapist has had this beaten over their head about how we need to do that.
Oh, there's so much that could be touched on
yeah.
that. I mean, I'm trauma informed.
Yeah.
You know, the one of the things that happens is that the trauma gets stuck in a person's short-term memory cells. Mm-hmm. And what you need for an expert like yourself, whether it's through EMDR, eye movement desensitization, or, sometimes you can utilize talk therapy, CBT. There's these different techniques, and people have different philosophies on what works or what's effective for them. But ultimately, what you want to do is you want to transfer the trauma from the short-term memory to the long-term memory where it belongs. Sure. It's not about it's not like the Men in Black coming and just wiping out your memories.
Yep.
But it's about being able to have a healthy relationship with what had happened to you, whether it's in your early childhood or wherever the thing happened. It could be like a one-time thing, or God forbid, some people struggle with complex PTSD, where they had like a litany of traumatizing experiences of varying levels of intensity. And when you target any one of those, it kind of brings the overall threat profile down.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, we could definitely touch on that. But I'm super fascinated by the reality. So basically what you're saying right now is, martial arts came into your life around 12, YMCA experience.
Yeah.
You discovered that there were all these different, like, schools of thought, philosophies, methodologies, the martial component, the spiritual component was lacking, right? This concept of healing along with, what people perceive to be violence, but it's really just conflict or the need to be able to engage in that way. And then about 9-10 years ago, Systema came into your life specifically to kind of fill that missing piece.
Yeah, like it's weird. I had sought out because I kept on going from practitioner to practitioner in terms of but I wasn't in it for a belt. Like I got tired of seeing 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds get black belts, right? And I'm not saying that as a criticism. If you own a martial arts dojo, it's important to support and encourage young people. It's important to stay employed. It's very hard. I think it's one of the hardest professions, or I would say businesses, to be in a martial arts, studio and to run that well. So anybody,
why do you think that is?
I just think it's hard. It's hard to retain people's interests. It's hard to get people to show up and to train with you long term, because remember, people do it for a season. I mean, a lot of in the United States, most of the martial arts schools you'll go to, they have a large number of young people. But it's a young person's game. Like you see people up to 30, and then it's either you're an instructor or you're doing inner martial arts, right? So more like inner katas or forms, but you're not, or you're the instructor or you're the business owner. And it doesn't mean that's, again, I don't run a martial arts studio, but I have high respect for people doing that. But I didn't want to just get another belt. I didn't even know what I wanted until I met different people, and I think it was a fruit of prayer, and God put the right people in my life. But I got into Aikido, right? Aikido was one of my favorite martial arts, and then that's
Sure,
how I
and-
jumped off.
And just to contextualize for people, Aikido stems from Japan.
Yep.
One thing that's so fascinating about, again, getting into the philosophy of this, or getting into the lineage, because that's really what it is. It's a lineage of,
story.
it's passing down tradition over the generations. We've thrown out a number of different ones throughout this conversation, but you mentioned Wing Chun at a certain point. That was invented by Ip Man, who was around.
No, he brought it to forefront, but I think that it's 500 years old.
Oh wow, okay.
And the
So
story,
he popularized it.
he did, and he was an excellent practitioner. We were talking about Donnie Yen, right?
Yeah,
Earlier
yeah,
today, yeah, wouldn't mess with Donnie Yen. He
No.
was tank. So
Well,
remember,
that's why it's funny. We were talking offline today, and you
Yeah.
were like, "Yeah, apparently in his 20s, something happened, and he had to engage, and there were 6 people that got hospitalized as real."
Yeah.
And then you were talking about your dad, and
Yeah, it wasn't him.
fighting 6 people. That's why I had to ask the
I
question.
don't think he was not very. I don't think he was skillful about it. But
Viral
apparently
at an
he was
old
still-
age.
No, it was when he was a young. Well, he was a young man, and he was a wild man, right? So.
But so there's Wing Chun, and then Ip Man in his elder years trained up briefly Bruce Lee. So here in America, a lot of people know about Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee took Wing Chun, a feminine martial art, by the way, and then developed Jeet Kune Do out of that. I read that book back in my early 20s, and that Bruce Lee wrote on that, and I just absolutely love it. And because you utilize a lot of, because I went Far East before my complete conversion to Catholicism, and when I was big into Buddhism and stuff, in the Rinzai school of Zen Buddhism, they're big on koans. Yeah. And with koans, you stretch your mind utilizing these paradoxical phrases, and Bruce Lee was big on that. So utilizing a different way of thinking to try to, and they have different purposes. Sometimes it's to systematize all of the different faculties in your body and to synergize them as one. Other times it's to kind of disconnect them or disassociate them so that you can engage the practice more efficiently. And that's what's so powerful, because it all comes back to mindset.
Well, it does, and like you said, like there isn't. But again, like, why are we training? I guess that's the question always. Why are we training?
Yes.
Are we training for a belt? Are we training to win a contest? And like you said, like in all of these different forms, they were brought forth by people. In all forms of martial arts that I've ever encountered, except for Systema, the fighting stance is that the hands go up. Because fear leaves the body through the hands. So if you see a little kid fall or you fall on the ground, your hands will go up, because fear leaves the body usually through the hands. So the hands go up. Whoa, whatever it is, right? You gotta do it. Right? But you same thing with boxing. When I teach people boxing, like, you got to bring your hands up. But there's an immediate tension and conflict. And what I saw with Aikido was I saw that starting to be removed. Right, and Sensei, the guy who formed, who started
Sensei
Aikido.
Spencer?
No, not Sensei Spencer.
Ah, man.
Sensei from, he did in Japan. He started Aikido. Aikido means the art of harmonizing peace, right? And so Aikido.
Who wouldn't want that?
Who wouldn't want that? And it's very honestly, there's a lot of overlaps, like you said, with Zen and Christianity, and there was a lot of people that were Kakiro Christo, which were like the remnant Christian people, that they would say it was connected to, like, in terms of their Zen philosophy, old Christian beliefs that they didn't understand because of the obviously the great apostasy through Japan. But you'll look at a lot of the Aikido principles.
Yeah, there's a lot of Shinto in Japan today.
Yeah, there's a lot of but there's a lot of unique practices. So when I studied Aikido, you can see God. If you have a relationship with Christ, you'll see God in whatever you're doing, whether it's work, you're doing coaching, or whether you're putting together a movie, or whether you're a doctor, whether you're teaching kids in a school, whether you're a stay-at-home mom. It doesn't matter. You'll see God, and so you start to see God in these different forms of martial arts. Right, and you see Christ in Aikido. Terry Dobson, one of my favorite. Terry Dobson is the guy who brought Aikido into the United States primarily. Right, so after Vietnam, Terry Dobson was a giant Marine. I think he was like 6'4", looked like Santa Claus. You can go on YouTube and listen to his stories. He is a funny guy, but again, you see a whole person. You see an integrated person. So something was correct, but I don't know if it was necessarily Again, there are no perfect disciples, and I don't think it's Aikido that does it. I think, remember, like we've talked about this before, it's a relationship with God and Christ, whether people know him by name or not, right? And so Dobson tells a story about when he learned Aikido, right? And he was in Tokyo and he was going back and forth on the train, and he was all so pumped up from doing this Aikido stuff. He gets on the train, and there's this drunk guy that gets on the train with him, and he sees him down the way coming onto the train, and he's like, yeah, now I'm gonna get to use this Aikido stuff. This guy's like, pushing this woman around. I'm gonna get to throw him around in the train. And so Dobson starts to move down the train towards the drunk man, and before he gets to him, out of the left side of the car, of the train car, an old man yells out, "Hey you," to the drunk man. "Hey you." And the drunk man goes, "Hey what?" And the old man sitting down goes, "What you been drinking?" And he goes, "Sake." And the old man goes, "Oh, me and my wife drink sake every night after dinner." And the drunk man goes, "I have no wife. I have no one." And then the old man stands up from the train car and puts his arm around the drunk man, and they both sit down. And Dobson says that was Aikido. Aikido, again, is always providing what is missing, right? And so, like, whether that's because it's not just, it's an internal martial art in the sense of, again, it's a system of thinking. But the most complete system that I've ever seen in terms of integration, especially with a personal relationship with Christ, that there is, like, they're not going to play games about it, is, yeah, they pray to God, to the Christian God, to Jesus Christ, because they're Orthodox Christians in Systema, right?
Systema.
In the practice. So and obviously, like, there are no perfect disciples. So you find people, I'm sure, and there are people that do it incorrectly. Michael Rahabko, who passed away 2 years ago, he was a colonel in Russian military, and he was the founder of Rahabko system. So the guy who I draw all my work from is Vladimir Vasiliev, who I am indebted to for the rest of my life for his work in teaching. And you can Google Systema Vasiliev. He
How
is
you spell that?
Vasiliev, V-A-S. Don't ask me to speak. You ask me to speak Russian or spell Russian. You can look up Systema.
Look it up. You won't know how.
It'll show up. He, by far, again, if you get out to Toronto, if you're a local person, if you can go up and you can spend a time with him, you will be overstimulated or over-impressed. I don't care if you've been doing martial arts for 30 years. I don't care if you own a gym. I think he's got to be almost 64, 65. It's worth a weekend trip to go spend time with the man. Let him hit you a couple times. And then Michael
It'll heal you.
Yeah, well, yeah, he will. But again, like, part of it is the peace in his body, the freedom he has, he will give it to you. It'll just come in the form of a fist. So, but you'll laugh after. You'll laugh and you go, yeah, I didn't know I was so scared. I didn't know, after all of this tension and all of these belts and all of this intensity and thinking that I was the whatever. Yeah, this guy, because he's different. So Michael,
let me ask you this. Is your community ready to ascend new spiritual heights? Head over to CatholicSpeakers.com to book Kyle Dean today and jumpstart your journey to sainthood. Just so we can contextualize this for the viewers and listeners, you mentioned that you have a seminar coming up.
Yeah.
There's going to be a Systema Seminar. I'd like you to explain the details so people know how to engage that. But before we do, I just want to summarize everything that you've been sharing, and thank you for sharing of your gift of storytelling and making it real for people. Essentially, the Americanized way, which seems to be a common theme when things get translated here into the West, is such that it became like consumerist. The belt system is a good way to maintain the business model. And again, with all respect and love to people that are harnessing that aspect of it and doing it well and doing it compassionately and responsibly. But that is a shift that took place, and you're seeing younger people in these different forms of martial arts engage, and then either few carry on the instructing role or many drop off. And that's either because the system is not life-giving, sustainably for the long haul, and or, if that spirituality is missing, it's kind of like, I want to kick this back to you in the form of a question. Like, do you think that the challenge there is that people view it as, it's like, well, if I sign up for the CPR training, I know how to do that skill. I've got the skill now. Let me just carry on with my life. And therefore, they don't necessarily feel like they need to stay with it throughout the rest of their life. Or like, what is it that's missing that keeps them from staying engaged in their martial art throughout life? Because we all know, like, you can know something, but if you don't stick with it, you might not, utilize it properly when it's actually needed.
Well, I think what you find is that, again, it goes back to why are you training? So like I said, in the beginning, I was seeking out to be tough. I didn't even know why I was training. I wanted to learn how to be violent. I wanted to be able to intimidate people. I had all the wrong ideas about martial arts because I was afraid. And most of my reasons for going into the martial arts was because I was afraid and because I did not really feel like I had what it took. The primary fear, and again, I've talked about this maybe with you, I know we talked about it on other shows, is men's fears is that we don't have what it takes, right? And that gets
right.
Really like played out.
Women, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Men, I don't have what it takes.
Yeah.
So with women, it's a sense of being, and men, it's a sense of doing.
It is. There's an action and a failure to either take action or we have to overact, right? We have to compete. So like in our world, we love sports because sports help us to deal with our fears. We watch other people deal with conflict, combat, but now they're wearing football helmets, right? So the question like you asked is like, well, why don't people continue? Well, I think in some ways there's a couple things. One is that it's really hard to persevere in something and to get good at something and then to continue to advance, right? And so like if you're a really invested practitioner of Taekwondo and you've done it for 30 years and I say, come with me to learn something new up in Toronto, and you're a 50-year-old man who has run a business around martial arts and you've trained police officers, military, you're not probably even going to want to go. I mean, it takes me a lot to go to places because as men, specifically men, we are absurdly self-reliant. We do not like the dimension of obedience, really, in a lot of ways. We struggle with this.
And docility,
yes,
which is a sub-virtue. Docilitas in Latin is the willingness to be led.
It's hard. That's so hard as a man. So to be putting myself to, again, encounter my weakness and my pride, I'm going to surrender that on the field of battle, right? That it doesn't matter how many stripes you got. It doesn't matter how many years you got, right? I remember when my buddy told me when he completed Ranger training, he said at the time he had a pretty high rank in the Army, and so they stripped him, right? As soon as you go into Ranger training, they make you remove all insignia. Everybody has the same, white shirt, whatever it is, you're stripped down. Nobody cares if you were elite on some other team. You're all the same. Captain, petty officer, it doesn't matter. Everything is stripped down. And I think like for us, if we engage in such a way, right, in these areas, we're going to encounter fears. We're going to encounter our pride, our attachments, the things, because fear reveals attachments and tensions. We have to keep letting them go. And they are hard to let go of, especially as you get older. We want consistency. We want authority. So why do I want to surrender this again? I've built this up. So it's hard. And once you invest in a system of practice, to surrender that and try something new, super uncommon. And like I said, I saw, like, that's why I think that when I entered that school of seeing these other practitioners, is there is humility, and they don't care if you've been there an hour or you've been doing martial arts for 50 years. They want to have you there to play with you. And play is the highest form of learning.
Yes.
And people don't understand that psychologically. They think competition is somehow learning. There's nothing in competition but performance. It's a performance at that point.
Well, you go back to how children behave.
Exactly.
Right? Like, it's amazing how natural everything comes to a child. And it reminds me, theologically, everything you're saying right now, by the way, reminds me of the quest of a theologian or a good apologetics warrior.
Yeah.
Right? Jesus chose men to be apostles because being an apologist, being an apostle, is extremely dangerous work, actually. And a lot of people don't think like that in terms of religion, because you need to be able to win hearts and minds, and people don't like to be challenged in their beliefs. Just like their authority, their philosophy of life, and all of that. they don't like to be challenged, but you need to be able to finesse. And that's why it's so powerful to be able to utilize an aspect of martial arts in your philosophy. Because if you can do it in a way that's disarming, you know, maybe you won't get your head chopped off like John the Baptist, or, you know what I mean? Or maybe, I mean, not to avoid martyrdom, but we also don't actively seek it. But it's fascinating. And it starts with childhood. The way into heaven is through the mind of a child. Children know how to breathe from the belly diaphragmatically. Yeah. Children know how, like you said,
to
with
roll, to move. Yeah,
exactly.
Natural movements.
And we need to return
to be children,
to our essence.
And so that's the thing, is as we get older, do we want to play or do we want to perform? And I think a lot of people get to thinking that they have to keep performing as a martial artist. But that's not the point. Unless that's again, I think it's just a reflection of they were training for the wrong things. They trained to be a warrior for a season. Or again, you train to be a warrior for life. And it does not mean that you're rolling around on the ground with 17-year-olds. It's funny, neurologically, over time, your reflexes go down. So like my reflexes are not as good as probably a 19-year-old's. The weird part is, with practice, especially with constant, and again, you saw this with Ip Man, because Ip Man, I think we talked about this. Ip Man, when he was at the end of his life in his 80s, he was actually even better. You'll see a lot of these guys like Vladimir in Toronto better in his 60s than he probably was in his 30s. Why? Because responsiveness of the body goes up neurologically. Your reflexes go down, but your responsiveness, because of the familiarity, right?
Absolutely. You've developed the neural links.
Exactly. You've changed
neurologically. It's second nature.
Yeah. But I think a lot of it is we it's a good gut check, right? So in one way, it's a good gut check of, do I want to play, or do I like myself so much? Am I afraid of looking stupid? Because if you're afraid of looking stupid, well, then you need to find something to humble yourself. And it doesn't mean you have to do martial arts.
Why is that just self-consciousness?
I think in general, like, we all struggle with liking ourselves too much. We really all struggle with pride and self-reliance in men in specific ways. And
I don't mean to be contrarian, but that actually surprises me that you say that. I mean, that's probably true for most people, but for someone with an upbringing like yours, and you and I have a lot in common, like, we had pretty hard knock fathers.
Yeah.
And I almost think that, because, you know, the way parents talk to you becomes your inner voice as you develop.
Sure.
And sometimes people can struggle with the opposite issue, that they don't like themselves enough, or that they hate themselves.
Well, and that can happen as well. But again, I think that's something that we don't always know. That actually takes deep self-knowledge to realize that what's motivating you is because you dislike yourself, or because that voice is still in you. And again, you have to be able to separate that voice from yourself. And that's something we can talk about at some point, maybe back on this podcast, because you do a lot of deliverance work. I know you've been doing a lot of coaching with people.
Yeah.
People cannot, it's very hard to differentiate, you know, these old narratives, or I call them agreements, right? These lies from childhood.
A contract.
Yeah.
Sometimes we refer to it in deliverance.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, even something as simple as agreeing to something with someone, but not following through, that could become a hook.
Exactly. And then that becomes, in some ways, a place where freedom is reduced, because my life can't be big there anymore. It shrinks a little bit because I've believed, and then I belived what I believed, right? I said, oh yeah, I surrendered that, and oh yeah, I'm a loser. Yeah, I don't deserve this. Yeah, I don't do this because this event happened, because this person said this to me. And nobody explained to me what was going on because I was 5. Nobody explained it to me because I was 9. I just had to figure it out on my own. Or the devil usually shows up in some form in your mind and just convinces you, well, this is why it happened. Because of you did blah, blah, blah. And
Sure.
so, obviously the work that you guys do with deliverance, and the work that people do through prayer and through coaching or through counsel, really, that's the dangerous kinds of stuff sometimes, is because you're removing these lies. People are seeing that these lies have kept them stuck. And so, obviously, when people are doing deliverance work, and, you know, we talk to exorcists, and that's why they get sometimes retaliation, because you're removing, same thing with therapists, they're removing the potential lie. And we're not aware of that. Therapy people, I think a lot of times we don't believe that there's a spiritual component. So, but
we've touched on this before, and you shared something with me. I hope you don't mind that I share it on the pod.
We'll just edit it out if I don't like it.
There you go. It's benign, but well, not in effect if this happens in people's lives. You told me that the statistical average of therapists suffering from the affliction of divorce is actually, the baseline is higher than the average in other fields.
Oh, it's higher, yeah, for sure. Suicide rate is higher,
which is insane to me, because you're supposed to be the put together person. Like, you are the authority to heal people's lives, to give them sanity. And yet those are such fundamentally disordered, like divorce, suicide. I don't even think that got brought up last time. Like, that's not good. And so that shows, if these therapists don't have the spiritual component in their lives, they're fundamentally unqualified, if I may. I know that's a strong word, to sustainably manage other people's lives, because it's one of those, like, it's like the proverbial, you're in the airplane and things are going bad. You got to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you're putting it on other people.
Well, it's true, but remember, like, a lot of, and again, I'm not saying that people aren't qualified. I think that it's dangerous. I think people don't understand. I mean, I've met many
meant you could become unqualified.
No, well, I mean, I've met many people professionally. Like, one of the reasons, and this is something maybe we can talk again about this, is, or how I got to practice differently, just clinically.
Yeah,
but one of my first colleagues from the cohort during graduate school took her life, right? And that was within 3 years of doing this practice of doing psychotherapy. So, and
God rest her soul.
Yeah, and that's the truth.
Sorry to hear that.
No, well, but it is terrible. But the thing is that people don't understand that there are forces that are beyond just what you learn in the psychological textbooks. And I think that we want to pray for people. If you're in counseling with somebody, or a doctor or a psychiatrist, please pray for that person. If they're not a person of faith, or you don't know what their faith is, or they tell you, because it doesn't matter. You're working with them. Pray for that person if you're a person of faith. And again, like, because it's a level, remember, it's a worldview, but it's a level of reality that we're exposed to, that we have knowledge of, which is a grace and a responsibility. But
Absolutely.
many, like we've talked about this before, it's like most of the world right now, the educated parts of the world, like, there's a disavowalment of the spiritual reality. It's like, no, doesn't, it's not true. Well, we know that that's not the case. And we know, obviously, like, that is a huge problem. So
absolutely,
if you're a practitioner of psychotherapy or counseling, yes, if you do not have some kind of spiritual life or relationship with God, I think that is a vulnerability. So yeah, you have high rates of divorce, significant family dysfunction, drug addiction, alcoholism, suicidality. I think before COVID, good old pre-COVID era, these are just clinical psychologists. I think the rate was that 25 to 30% of clinical psychologists had been suicidal, so it had suicidal thoughts, and like 12% of them had attempted suicide in their career. That's before COVID. After COVID, everyone's mental health has gone into the tank even more. So I don't know what the statistics are, but I need you to think that people are very vulnerable. And like, just because we're smart or educated or have knowledge about the mind doesn't matter.
No,
we're doing work that I think a lot of times unassuming to ourselves, myself included. We don't know it.
Well, let's close with this, because I know we're going to
Sure.
wrap up here. Just for the sake of pragmatism, and by the way, you're absolutely right. I mean, we please pray for your deliverance ministers, because it's a very selfless field. There's no money involved.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, right? We've joked. I mean, you laugh so you don't cry. Like, there's people out there who literally get paid to put demons in people.
Yep.
Which is sick. I mean, and then we, as faith healers, have to come in and clean up the mess. And absolutely, there is an increased amount of retaliation, but that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, you have to be very self-aware and confident, and but also, most importantly, reliant on the Lord.
Oh, yeah.
To be able to manage these things. So the closing question for you, Dan, is what do you do, being aware of these realities and knowing that you do suffer the retaliation, because all souls are bought for a price, right? And when you take on the role, whether it's a therapist,
Sure.
life coach, or deliverance minister, to clean up somebody, you have to participate in paying that price so that they can be free. What do you do to manage that?
Well, I think we've talked about this a little bit. I think, and I've grown a lot from our conversations just because you've had so much exposure to the spiritual dynamics and the spiritual warfare stuff. So at some point, we've got to go through that on my show because I think, like again, you have a knowledge of the spiritual life. But one of the key things about healing, right? And I know that you've studied under a lot of Ripperger, and we both have worked with. Exorcists over the years. And the interesting thing is all healing comes down to a relationship with Jesus Christ. It's not a textbook. It's not a 12-step program. It's not a retreat. It is a relationship with Jesus Christ. So I have to be moving closer to him, and I have to be listening to how does he want to bring me closer. So he's going to remove things from my life. I got to change my life. I got to constantly convert. Like I have to constantly be in a state of conversion. I have to be moving towards him. And so like, and again, I think that mindset, as you said, that orientation, like, again, like there's a seriousness about this. And in the beginning, I mean, and you probably could say the same thing in the beginning, I didn't understand the seriousness of this. I didn't understand like what was at play. I was not aware of it, and God reveals what he reveals. So I think at the core is I have to have that relationship, and I have to understand that the healing is not me. The healing is not me. The healing is going to be Jesus Christ. Sometimes he uses me. Sometimes he uses deliverance ministers. Sometimes he uses the priest or he uses the doctor. He can come in whatever form he wants, but it is always a relationship with Jesus Christ that does the healing. And sometimes he is known by name, and sometimes he is incognito. And for many people, he's incognito because Christ is perfectly humble. And he wants the relationship more. Sometimes I feel like Christ wants the relationship even more than just having people recognize him, if that makes sense. He loves people so much. And so I think like, when we think about it, like, for myself, I have to be invested in the sacraments. I have to go to confession. I have to, because I'll have people, and same type of thing. You better be in a state of grace, man. You better be in a state of grace. And that's the cool part, though, is knowing that seriousness and taking it to a different level. Well, now all of a sudden, your life becomes more ordered. Because I remember we talked about this before. It's like, well, if you're doing this type of work and there's always a level of there's a level of diabolic stuff. Well, aren't you worried about retaliation? And but the truth is actually your life should be even more perfectly ordered towards God because it's that level of intensity. And it doesn't mean that everybody's going to understand that, but that is a requirement, right? You can't just kind of deal with this stuff and be prideful of it at all. You have to be more dependent on God.
Absolutely.
And I think that, and I've seen that with you. I've seen that with many people. Is that there is, and it's confusing. I think to even outsiders is like there has to be a closer and a more intense trust in God. Because again, the more we trust God, the more we receive his mercy. The less we trust God, the more we trust ourselves. And the more we trust ourselves.
Heaven forfend.
Yeah, well, and then I can tell when I trust myself because I'm judgmental. That's how I know I'm trusting myself. Is I will see myself as the seat of judgment and be critical of myself or other people. And so again, and that's a whole other conversation.
So it's a consistent gut check. Is what I'm hearing you say.
It is, yeah. And it's a consistent movement in relationship. Without the relationship, you fail. But the closer you get to God, I think a lot of people get this wrong, but I think you get this because you've seen this in your own life, is the closer you get to God, the weaker you feel. You don't feel stronger. You don't think
Second Corinthians 12 or 15, St. Paul says it's my weakness.
Yeah.
In my weakness I am made strong.
Exactly. So
because he's leaning on the grace more.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I'll just say real quick, first 5 to 7 years when I was involved in deliverance ministry, even my closest friends had no idea.
Sure.
And then they find out. And it's always the first reaction is like fear. And it's like, well, what the, you could get retaliated against. And
Sure.
It's like, yeah, well, if literally everybody has that response, then no one's going to get healed.
But God is in control.
Yeah,
God is in control of whatever's going on. And that's the thing that is so remarkable is regardless of what's going on, it's all under Christ's control.
And the thing that always humbles me the most is when you actually get to serve those souls that are so in need, like in need in ways that are beyond just beyond the world's comprehension, they don't have the luxury of option.
Sure.
They don't have the option of, I'm going to draw nearer to the Lord. It's do or die. And they have a tremendous appreciation. You say something as simple as putting on your armor of God and respecting that dynamic. Like, I need the habitus. I need the habitual sanctifying grace on, or else I'm going to get shellacked. But when these people are ready, because that's really what's happening, the Lord is setting up a spiritual dynamic in the battlefield, that they are finally ready for him. And when they understand, like, hey, live the sacramental life. It's like an RCIA class.
Sure.
People can go into these classes and check the boxes, and it's like, oh man, really, this is what I was missing? Or it's just, it feels like, academic and boring to some. But then when you're in this dynamic, it's like, this is what I have to do to live. And it becomes a quest. It's like a quest. It's like, no, I got to put on the armor. It's like, you'll never receive the sacraments the same way again.
No, there's a reality that you can't go back to, right? It's the old sign at the hospital I had. It just said no vacations. There are you have to continue. You can't go back. Once you start the journey, you don't stop it. It's a very bad idea, and I don't think it's possible. Nobody wants, just like the Matrix. You don't want to go back to sleep. That's a bad idea.
Absolutely.
And I don't think people go back to. Some people, I think, can.
Cypher wanted the blue pill. He's the proverbial archetype of willful ignorance, and yeah. I mean,
no blue pills.
There's consequences to that action. So, Dan, how can people plug in with the seminar coming up? Do we have a date on that one yet?
Yeah, so that'll be on January 11th of 2025. So about 4 weeks from the date of this recording or so. And again, it's going to be a fundraiser for the Chesterton Academy of Western New York.
Awesome.
So,
Chesterton Academy of Buffalo, baby.
Yeah. So we've got a couple. We've got some great speakers. A friend of mine, Deacon Mike Attilis, is going to be there, and he is a jiu-jitsu practitioner. He's a deacon, a jiu-jitsu practitioner. He operates and has operated a school. Fantastic man, very skilled man, very skilled fighter. He's the real deal. He's going to be giving a talk. Father Peter St. Andrew, who is also like in our diocese. He is a canon lawyer, and he's going to be talking about
very
surrender.
Intelligent man.
Yeah, very intelligent man. He's talking about surrender. And so we've got men talking about sportsmanship, men talking about the surrender to the will of God, and then my job is to teach people how to fight like a spy. So if you know anybody that wants to join us for the day, it'll be like probably 8:30 to 8:30, and we're going to end with Mass, and we'll have confession in the middle of the day, and lunch will be included. But yeah, people will hopefully get something from it. Got to be 14 or up. We want people to be, we want people to have fun and get a good time out of it. But if you know people that want to be a part of it, have them sign up. They can, I'll send you the link if they want to, take a look at it. It'll be on the Chesterton Academy website too. So thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Love that. Yeah. So you heard it here, January 11th, 2025.
Yep, Saturday. Yeah.
Systema Seminar.
Oh, it's Spies and Sportsmanship and Surrender to God. That's our title. So yeah, it'll be good times, man.
Thanks be to God, Brother Dan.
Yep.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, 100%. And if you enjoy content like this, we exhort you to like, subscribe, share. Check out therichdon.com. Sign up for some life coaching, and God bless you.
Thank you.